I would like to then go back to what was Project MAUSAM's initial agenda. It connects countries, it connects communities. My last point, transnational heritage has to involve others. The challenge we face is China. It also connects to another island, which is Socotra. People visited this cave, they left inscriptions. And which language or which script are these inscriptions? These inscriptions are in Brahmi. It has an inscription which talks about Ashtabhuja Swami Vishnu. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to be here, and thank you to the organizing committee for inviting me. I am absolutely delighted that something which is so close to my heart, maritime research and maritime history, is finally finding a platform. So it's been a great evening, and thanks for all your lectures and comments. And I would like to then go back to what was Project MAUSAM's initial agenda. And that agenda is UNESCO's transnational heritage. That is what Project MAUSAM was all about. Why transnational heritage? Transnational heritage because it connects countries, it connects communities, and brings this Project MAUSAM on the global stage. It has geopolitics, which I will come to, but please remember that this is not maritime history or maritime archaeology, but is very specifically aimed at a global platform. Which means that if we shift away from maritime history and archaeology to looking at Project MAUSAM as transnational heritage, then there are specifics which we need to adopt. And I think this has been a lacuna and a sort of failing, should one say, that we've been thinking in terms of history and archaeology, but not the specifics that UNESCO requires of us, and not the specifics that Project MAUSAM should take, and not the path that Project MAUSAM should take. So the first point is, upon my thing, I'm going to only talk about two UNESCO conventions, which is the UNESCO's 1972 Convention for Protection of National and Cultural Heritage, the 2001 Convention, which is underwater archaeology. And Admiral Chauhan had talked about legislation. I'll come back to it. The point then is that what does the UNESCO Convention require of us? It requires place or site-based. That means we need to identify monuments. We need to identify archaeological sites which connect. Second point, that these sites should be associated. They should have, as the UNESCO calls it, OUV, or outstanding universal value. So we need to have a narrative. This narrative, you talked about the romance of the Navy. This narrative of maritime history, I would argue, is kind of missing. You know, we talk of India, we talk of us being great, but we need to remember that it's the others who should tell us that we are great. We should not be telling the others that, we are great. So it's the narrative which has to be research-based, which has to be credible, which has to then link up to archaeological sites, place names, and this narrative, I think, we can develop and will develop. And if I overshoot my time by a few minutes, I hope you won't mind. This is what I'm planning to do this evening. My last point, transnational heritage has to involve others. And it is a sad commentary. I have taught history and archaeology. It is a very sad commentary in this country. We have not developed the expertise in the histories and archaeologies of other countries. We only do Indian history. The challenge we face is China. Admiral Chauhan mentioned China, but it's not just on the Himalayan shores. We face China in the cultural heritage arena. And I will just talk through with a few slides as to why this is a challenge. China has more sites than us. That's not an issue. But we have used our heritage sites for cultural tourism and not for building global interactions, whereas China has done that very effectively. They have brought in the maritime Silk Road. There is no such thing. I mean, this is a 19th century invention by a German philosopher, but the Chinese are selling it very well, and they've been doing it since the 1980s. And in the process, they are not only inventing, and this is happening in the South China Sea, they're not only inventing islands, making islands, but actually occupying those islands. So the threat is real, and the threat from the sort of inversion or the a narrative which completely wipes out Indian history is there for us to face. So let's look at the UNESCO's Silk Road program. Xuanzhou which is a World Heritage Site. It is transnational. They have already inscribed it, and they have brought in other countries. This is very important. Singapore, Malaysia, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, all the countries that we are looking at, and all the countries which are strategic to our interests. What are they selling? Not just the Maritime Silk Roads concept, which is being sold very well, but also the fact that this took with it ideas, technology, and knowledge systems. And this is from the National Geographic, which talks about how China was very important in the knowledge system domain in the period between 600 and 1700. I have labeled this India's history that India forgot, because South China also has temples, also has remnants of medieval merchant guilds, but we have not either built into it or even sold it as a universal idea on the global platform. What is being sold, what is being accepted in all across Southeast Asia, not just China, Southeast Asia and Europe, of course, is Admiral Zhenghe's 15th century voyages, which were by no means diplomatic voyages, but by no means, these straightforward voyages in the first place at all. But, you have the Stitch ship, but here is the Chinese ship that has been set up in the Nanjing shipyard. So what is different? What is different is shipwrecks. What is different is underwater archaeology. India is not a signatory to the 2001 convention, but there are reasons for it. And Admiral Chauhan mentioned legislation, because we do not have legislation to protect underwater heritage. We have legislation for land heritage, but not for underwater heritage. And we have to have this legislation in keeping with international requirements. So until we have that, and unfortunately, we also then don't have shipwrecks. So how do shipwrecks help? I mean, how does it solve the problem? Southeast Asia has more than 100 shipwreck sites. You can see the dots on the map. Most of these ships carried Chinese ceramics. So what do we find when we get a shipwreck? We find a lot of Chinese ceramics. So how does that then conflate into a narrative? Straightforward. Chinese ships carried Chinese ceramics. So China is the dominant power in the Indian Ocean, because these ceramics are being carried from about 700 AD onwards. Whereas we have yet to discover shipwrecks in our, in the Indian Ocean. Another narrative, which is again a very popular narrative, the Austronesians. And this, you will see the sort of green shadowed area on the map. The Austronesians are spread as early as 3000 to 1500 BCE. They had the best ships. They were the best sailors. They spread all the way from East Asia to Madagascar, all across. India is kind of missing in that. You must have noticed on the map. It is the Austronesian sailors who then built the ships and sailed them. So is this all academic? Is this all stuff which I have read up and, I'm trying to show my knowledge? if you go to a museum, and I'm sure you have in the Asian Civilizations Museum, there's a big gallery. It's called the Shipwreck Gallery. The ship that is displayed there is the Tang shipwreck. Tang being the Tang dynasty of China. So you will ask me that, oh, okay, so was it found in China? No, it was found in Indonesia. It was found off the island of Belitung in Indonesia. But I don't have time to go into the story. If you do Belitung shipwreck, Google Belitung shipwreck, you'll read the story behind it. That how the Belitung shipwreck transformed into a nice Chinese Tang shipwreck, very nicely displayed in the Asian Civilizations Museum. And the ship that carried the Chinese ceramics was a stitched boat. And when it was found, it was labeled Indian. Over the years, it has become Indo-Arab. Why has it become Indo-Arab? Because the Omanis built a replica, sailed it all the way to China and to Japan, and the Singaporeans bought into that, and it's a ship from the Middle East. The story is not merely of history. The story is of research. The story is of shipwreck sites. The story is of a diverse shipping tradition in the Indian Ocean. This was a wreck which was discovered in Kerala, 10th century. And it's a wreck which is found along the coast. But it is not a stitched boat. It is built of iron nails, which clenched iron nails. So the point I'm making is that there is diversity. There is a big gap in what or where we are going as far as the waters is concerned. But should we give up? Should we say, oh, well, we don't have legislation, we don't have shipwreck sites, so where do we go? Where do we move from here? Let's go to the 1972 convention. So all is not lost. And the point I'm making is that we can still build a very good narrative. We have the wherewithal, but we really need to put our minds to it. The current priority area of UNESCO are twofold: small islands and Africa. Small islands we can really build on that. And the map that you have is Maldives, which is an archipelago which has several small islands. And it is very strategic to India's interests. How can we build on that? Let us look at what India is called. India has an island identity. It is called Jambu Dweepa. The Brahmagiri inscription of Ashok talks about Jambu Dweepa. This is not the perception that the Greeks had of India. The Greeks thought, after the Ganga, there was nothing more. There was no peninsula. So this is the Greek perception of India, but why don't we build on our own identity of Jambu Dweepa, the identity of India as an island? Why don't we connect to other islands? There are several in the Western Indian Ocean, starting from Failaka in Kuwait to Socotra off the Yemeni coast, Salsette, which you will be surprised. I mean, today is Mumbai, but it was islands. And of course, the Maldives. Let me just try and connect these islands and see whether I can convince you that we have a good solid base to go for the transnational nomination. Salsette today is on the outskirts of Mumbai, but it has nationally protected monuments, the Kanheri caves. These Kanheri caves connect not just are based not just on the island, but also connect to the other sites in the mainland. And you have a list of sites and the arrows that I have marked. It also connects to another island, which is Socotra. And why is Socotra important to us? There's a cave on Socotra, which is called the Hawk Cave. It is a 2-kilometer deep cave. And why it is important is that people visited this cave. They left inscriptions. And which language or which script are these inscriptions? These inscriptions are in Brahmi, which was a script that we used in India, and it is also used in Southeast Asia. So there are almost about 200 graffiti and drawings. Offerings were made in this cave. The maximum number of inscriptions, 192, are in Brahmi. There are other languages that are present: Bactrian, Greek, Palmyran, Aksumite, Ethiopian. So it was a place where people from many directions met. And it was a place where the sailors stopped on the way to Egypt or further west. There are also place names which are mentioned in these inscriptions: Bharukacha, which is Barigaza, and there are occupations which are mentioned. Merchants, of course, yes, that's what you would expect, but also teachers. The term used is achara. There's also Navika, sea captain, Niryamaka, the captain. So there are several occupations who traveled. It's not just that only traders or merchants traveled, but there are many others. It also depicts ships, and there are symbols, the Trishula and other symbols on this site. So can we then think of Salsette to Socotra as a transnational nomination? What would our criteria be, and what can we use as the criteria? Now, UNESCO requires only one criterion, but it can be more than one, the better for it. So one criterion we already have, which is it should be a place of interchange of human values. And Socotra, certainly, I will come in a moment to what this human value can be. But Socotra is a place, it is a cave, it has inscriptions, it was a place where people halted. The Greeks talk about Indians, Arabs, Greeks settled on this island. So clearly, we can think of nominating on the basis of interchange of human values. We can also think, this is difficult, we need far more research, we haven't done this. The sea traditions, the sea use. How was the sea used in different parts of the Indian Ocean? I think we need more work on this, but it is still possible to bring that in. And of course, the third is the cultural traditions, which were quite unique, both in the case of Kanheri as well as in the case of Salsette. So what would this human value be that we can take up? I would argue that this human value would be writing. The Indian Ocean in the ancient period, really Brahmi spread across the ocean, both westward and eastward. I don't have time to talk about East so much today, but Southeast Asia, we do know that many of the early inscriptions were in Brahmi. The languages may be different, but certainly westward. And this map shows the spread from Vietnam, from Cha Kiu in Vietnam, all the way to the. It doesn't quite go up to the Red Sea, but Berenike on the Red Sea is where I'm going to take it to. So let's just look at writing in the minutes that I have left for my talk. And the writing that the script that I would argue is very prevalent is Brahmi. It occurs in inscriptions on stone, copperplate, and so on, but it also occurs on pottery. You talked about the Ajanta ship. What was carried in this Ajanta ship? Pots. There was writing on these pots, and in archaeological contexts, we get potsherds with writing on it. There were several languages. Brahmi is not limited to any one language, which is interesting. Sanskrit, Prakrit, Tamil, 3 languages clearly. Many more in Southeast Asia. Why is writing important? Think about it. If you just have to memorize and you didn't go back and read anything, there's that much that knowledge would progress. So writing really allows you to produce cumulative knowledge and to move on from where one left off, which in a certain way, orality can go only that far. And I'm not going to go back here, and somebody could ask me, well, the Vedic tradition was oral, but we're not going there for the moment. That's another argument. Writing also as a marker of cultural identity. Why are all these people who are traveling from India, various occupations, why are they leaving these edicts or these inscriptions at Socotra? This is very different from the traditional view. The traditional view argues it was Ashok who introduced writing, and it was Ashokan's edicts which were the first written form of knowledge. So what I'm saying is very different. And today, the archaeological dates for writing on pottery are almost 5th, 4th centuries BCE, long before Ashok, and long before the argument that writing came from the West and from Armenia and so on and so forth, which I'm not going into. Let us look at the terracottas. The one on top is it shows it's child Buddha writing on a wooden tablet. The bottom one is a stone bowl with a donatory inscription on the rim of the bowl. And this was found from Rohtak, Khokrakot. The site, of course, is in a bad way, but this is an excellent example, writing on many, many objects, not just on copper plate or not just on stone inscriptions. Conch. Where does the conch come from? It comes from the sea. This conch, inscribed conch, is part of the Archaeological Survey of India excavations at Nagarjun-Konda. It was found in a temple, site 29 in Nagarjun-Konda. It's dated to the 3rd, 4th centuries CE. It has an inscription which talks about Ashtabhuja Swami Vishnu. It bears a chakra on a pillar. We don't have freestanding chakras, but you get a lot of them in Thailand in the Dwaravati period. So if we look at Brahmi, it spreads from Berenike, which you see on the left-hand side of your screen, on the Red Sea to Cha Kiu in Vietnam. The languages are many. Please differentiate between language and script. The languages are many. In Berenike itself, Greek was the lingua franca. But we have pottery, which is inscribed in 11 different languages. The dates are 3rd century BCE to 550 CE. That's where Berenike is located. It was a site which was excavated over many seasons. It was a site which has also given us very rich evidence in archaeological terms. But what is of interest to me is that it is a site which has provided shrines of different denominations. So it has a shrine of the Palmyrans, it has an Isis temple, and it also has an early Christian church, a 5th century church. But it also has Buddha images. And these are images which have come up in recent excavations. And one sees that Buddhism spread not just, to Southeast Asia, but also westward. And there is a stele at the bottom, which depicts 3 South Asian figures, possibly deities. And there are coins, there are Kshatrapa coins, and there's a whole lot of stuff from Berenike. But all along, from Egypt, from Berenike, right along the South Arabian coast, you have several sites where there is evidence of writing, particularly Brahmi. This is a site called Khor Rori. It's a World Heritage Site, Oman, Sultanate of Oman. And again, it has inscriptions in Brahmi, but the language is both Tamil and Brahmi. Sorry, Tamil and Prakrit. And in addition are these the ships that are shown, as well as the bronze figure, which was found at Khor Rori. It comes from Sumhuram. But also, very interestingly, it has beads made of fish vertebrae. And these specific beads come from Bet Dwarka, is the other site, which have these specific beads. So the point I'm making is there is cultural connect. There is connect in terms of writing. There is connect in terms of the people who traveled and who moved on. And there is also connect in terms of architecture, which I will come to in a moment. But let me just bring in one more site, which is the site of Tissa Maharama. It is in southeast Sri Lanka. Tissa Maharama is also important because the one and only shipwreck that we have, Godavaya shipwreck, was found close to, was found in Sri Lankan waters, but close to Tissa Maharama. And this is a site which has provided evidence for Buddhism. There is a citadel, there is also a hospital. But what interests me are these pottery shards with writing. They have fairly early dates, pre-Mauryan dates. So I think it's time we rethink our ancient past and move away from the Mauryas to see what was happening before that. Another thing that I would like to point out here is that you will notice that some of these are by nuns. So women traveled. It's not just that there were men sailors, but the women also traveled. And the other point is that we don't have architecture here, but we do have these inscribed potsherds. The other area is Vietnam, where you have inscribed objects, Okyo Bathe. And again, this is being listed as a tentative World Heritage Site, but possibly are also, the Vietnamese are also putting in a proposal. I think Vietnam is another area which has great strategic interest to us. So having said this, so we've looked at human values, but what anchored these human values? What provided them sort of sustainability on the coast? I mean, people just don't sort of float around without any anchorage. And I'm arguing that where the rivers and the sea meet, that is where the coastal shrines are located. These shrines also provided navigational aids in a period when we don't have GPS, when we don't have the other technological sort of facilities to find land. How did the sailors in the ancient period find land? How did they realize that they were nearing land? And one of the ways in which they realized that, and we have a lot of texts which talk about this. We also have inscriptions. One of the ways in which they found land was to look at landmarks, to look at some specific landmarks. And my final slide is that these landmarks, this is Mahabalipuram, which you all know. But what I would like you to sort of see is the bottom slide, the lighthouse. The lighthouse is located very close to an early temple, which was the Ulakanishwar temple, which is on top of the Mahishasur-Mardini cave, which was used as a marker for incoming ships. And this was before the 18th century, before lighthouses were built. This is not the only example. Erimala has a lighthouse and a temple next to it. And I can go along the coast and give you any number of examples. So my final point is, let's not wait. Let's work towards a transnational nomination. We have friendly neighbors. Leaving aside Pakistan and the others, Maldives now, certainly Kuwait, certainly Vietnam, and perhaps even if we don't have the 39 countries that ASI is looking at, if we have 4 or 5 countries with whom we can tie up, with whom we can make a proposal to say that we can transcribe this transnational nomination based on these 1 or 2 criteria. Let us start, and then we can add on and we can build on. And my request to all the young people assembled here, please look at the sea, look at maritime history, look at the inscriptions, and please build expertise in countries other than India. India just cannot keep talking about India alone. There are many other countries which we need to build expertise on. With that, thank you very much. And once again, thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. I feel privileged before the galaxy of a speaker, which has already talked a lot about, starting from introduction to great dawn of Indian archaeology, Professor B.B. Lal, to after that today's chief guest speak a lot about his experience with Professor B.B. Lal and also the present archaeological scenario. The mesmerizing talk of Sanjeev Sanyal is building boat and sailing in so difficult sea. That is also a very, very mesmerizing lecture. And after that, the romantic talk. Not only the content is romantic, but talk is also very much romantic. So we all mesmerize with this. And now I can confidently say the B.B. Lal Memorial Committee or B.B. Lal Memorial Lecture or this endeavor getting a very good shape. I'm very much confident in later on we will do a more prolonged day-long seminar memory of Professor B.B. Lal. Not only the seminar, but a lot of maybe we will take a bigger wing to incorporate many things in by this committee. Today's key speaker, ma'am, you have also given a very elaborate lecture or elaborate talk about the maritime heritage, how to go beyond which we are thinking in earlier. So it's a time to have a very collaborative effort to go and give a shape of MAUSAM project. And this is very, very important for India's strategy and also to establish India's legacy, India's history, India's archaeology, and of course, maritime heritage. I just to give the tribute and Professor B.B. Lal, I just try to just some memory when I joined archaeology as a student. I first met Professor B.B. Lal in WAC, World Archaeological Congress, and I was volunteer in that congress as a student. After that, so there is a lot of movement, and in the last 6-7 years before the death, I was very close to Professor B.B. Lal as a family member. And the hospitality of yours and ma'am, it's a really a great. Always one thing I remember, Professor Lal, जब भी वो बात करते थे फ़ोन पे, आप राजेश लाल जी फ़ोन ज़रूर हमें लगाते थे, लेकिन बात वो खुद करते थे. The last, the memory in final 100 years or around 100 years is so good that जब हम मिलते थे तो he talked a lot about the excavation, the findings of excavation, the interpretation which they try to do in Mahabharata and Ramayana and other site also. That was really a memorable and inspiring for me in course of my archaeological work in every time. एक खास बात जो लाल साहब ने अपने बुक में भी मेंशन किया है कि हाउ गो बियॉन्ड एंड व्हाट इज द की क्वेश्चंस वी हैव टू बी focused on, or some project should be taken up by the government of India or any of the state government or any of the private organization. That is to prove that whether Harappan culture and Vedic culture is same, or date of the Vedic civilization particularly. He mentioned one of the event, an astronomical date of Rig Veda, that is 4500 BCE, and also he mentioned Arthaveda date of 3500 BCE. And they also said that if we are able to establish archaeological finding, archaeological narrative with those lines, that will be very important for Indian history and Indian archaeology. Why it's important? He always told me also one thing, date about the Virana of 6000 BCE, about the date of Virana, and later on date of Rakhigadi, Kunal also proved that the 6000 BCE date of early farming culture of this region is prevailing. So it's a really very foresighted questions and task given by him to at least verify those things with the archaeology and historical narrative, and also the written text like Vedas and later text. We all know he tried to establish the Mahabharata and Ramayana, which is a very, very important task and very challenging and bold step taken by him. Lot of criticism also happen. A lot of new things come up after that project. It's a really a daring project, and that is inspired a lot for later archaeologists like me, and I try to think on that line also. Now very different narrative coming up. uh, so these new researches is the actual tribute to Professor Lal, who has tried to establish not the scientific way of excavation, the documentation and discipline on the archaeological discipline, and also they try to understand the Indian text, Indian narrative, Indian thought process, and vice versa of archaeological finding. It's a really a very difficult task, no doubt about it. So in his book, you can clearly see the question of horse, question of chariot, question of spoke wheel, question of Aryan invasion or Aryan migration, the date of Vedas, date of Harappans, and whether Harappans are indigenous or whether they are coming from West. So there is a lot of questions they try to address very well, and they left many questions for us also. So this is a time to take a project by either by the government of India or any of the organization to see the further more what we can do. This may be the actual tribute to Professor B.V. Lal. It's a really difficult to sum up the entire thing, which is in last 2 hours deliberation. It's a really very good and way forward for this committee to do a more such like endeavor in memory of Professor B.V. Lal, and also support the new generation, new scholars to take ancient history and archaeology as a discipline. I'm happy to say that Delhi University recently started archaeology as a discipline in the subject. So this is a new development. So this is a very good initiative. Possibly this type of lecture in Delhi University and other university also inspired a lot for administrator as well as the archaeology and history enthusiastic students to get in this field. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak in the last, but it's a really difficult to sum up this entire deliberation. Thank you very much.